solutions, ways to resolve violations. Sometimes the only way to resolve a violation is to take them to court. We'll talk about preparing a court case, a few things like that. And so let's get started. If you remember yesterday's course, we talked about how to have meetings with violators, that kind of stuff. A few years ago, I had a city clerk in South Central Kansas, and over half her town was in the floodplain. She was also being the floodplain manager for her town. She had a man who was putting junk in his front yard. Junk cars, old washing machines, that kind of stuff. I'm not sure what his plan was, but she didn't like the looks of it. Their city didn't have any zoning codes or code enforcement, but they did have floodplain regulations, and she decided, and she was right, that this was a violation of her regulations for the storage of materials that wasn't being anchored in the floodplain. So instead of sending him a notice letter like we talked about in yesterday's seminar, she shut his water off. When the man came to City Hall to find out why his water had been shut off, she told him to get his junk out of there and she'd turn his water back on. He got his junk out of there, and that solved her problem, and she was real proud of herself. And she told me that story, and I was like, well, that's really great, but you know, I'm kind of worried you could have ended up with a lawsuit on your hands. You can't just turn people's water off without sending them any kind of notice. So there's a process to these things when you're dealing with violations. People have the right to due process. So I'm hoping that in these seminars we're doing on violations, you can get an idea of a way to set up a process for yourselves to deal with violations. We actually have a set of written administrative procedures. If you'd like to see them, Cheyenne can send them to you, that have a section about having enforcement procedures. So it tells you how to enforce your ordinances, and it has within it a section on enforcement. It's not a big section. It's basically a basic section that would line out some things, template for you to follow every time. We tried to make it fill in the blanks. You cannot make a fill in the blanks format that's going to fit every city and county in Kansas. So think of this as a starter set, a baseline. But you get this done, you'd have a baseline of rules to follow. And if you follow those rules the same way with everybody, you should be all right with your enforcement. Now, I want you to keep in mind, if you learn one thing from this seminar today and absolutely nothing else, always stay safe. Safety first. Stay safe, stay safe, stay safe. I can't say it enough. And I'm known for being long-winded and telling stories, and I'm not going to disappoint you today. I'm going to tell you some stories. So this happened a few years ago, and I was dealing with a violation, and it was near the City of Americus, Kansas, and the Neosho River floodplain, Lyon County. And there was a 20-acre parcel, and somebody had moved in 36 old junk mobile homes onto the property. These are the kind of things that people give you for free if you agree to haul them away. It just looked horrible when you looked at the aerial image. You just like a mobile home graveyard, junkyard sort of thing. Sent a letter to the owner of record of the property. It was a woman in Missouri. Now, they were from Missouri, and that should have been my first clue something was wrong. I'm just kidding if you're from Missouri. Anyway, lady in Missouri, what I didn't know was she was an elderly woman, and she was in a nursing home. Her son was the one putting these junk mobile homes out there on that property. She didn't have any idea, and she got really upset with her son and really upset about the situation. The son was angry at me for upsetting his mother, but I didn't know that at the time. He called me a few days later, said he'd be coming to Kansas in 3 days, and that he'd come and take care of everything and get all those mobile homes out of there. And he wanted me to come out to the property and meet with him and inspect his work. I said, well, just call me and I can go out there anytime. And if they're gone, they're gone. I'll be able to tell that pretty easily. Well, a few days later, he arrives in Kansas and he called me. He says, I'm out at the property right now and we're working and we're getting rid of them. And I want you to come out here and see what we're doing. He was really insistent. So I checked out a car and I drove out there. Now, this is a wooded property near the river out in the unincorporated area in the farms. And there was a gap between the trees where it was a short driveway you could drive up in the property. When I got there, he had 2 other people with him. They were working, and they were basically stripping the aluminum siding off of the mobile homes and putting them in a stack to save them for recycling, to get a little money out of them, burning the frames, and then they were going to take the metal part at the bottom and the axles and convert those into trailers for hauling hay bales. He had this big plan to sell those trailers and make some money. I had just pushed him along because he hadn't been doing it in a timely manner. Well, when I pulled in, he walked over to my car and he immediately said, don't worry about this gun, it's for snakes. He didn't say, what's your name or hello, my name is. He just said, don't worry about this gun. It was first things out of his mouth. He was wearing a holster with a revolver, kind of like cowboys would wear in an old cowboy movie. He had two other people with him. There was a large young man. I was introduced to him as his son. He was about a head taller than me, and his daughter-in-law was there. And like I said, they were working on these mobile homes. The daughter-in-law was dressed for work. She had on work gloves and work boots and an apron, but that's about all she had on. She wasn't wearing anything like a shirt or anything. And I allowed myself to be somewhat distracted at that moment when I saw the daughter-in-law, and I kind of forgot about the gun for a second. Then the gentleman said to me, "Hey, come here. I need you to come here and look at this. I need you to come look at something." And he starts heading down towards the creek. And I thought, well, there's some kind of problem down in the floodplain. Maybe there's something with the stream channel. So I followed him like an idiot. We get down in the woods, and he stops in this little clearing. I don't see anything, and he starts telling me a story, and it's a true story that happened in that area quite a few years ago. A lot of people locally know all about it, but there was this farmer who had teenagers that would come out on his land and have parties and drink beer and light bonfires, and they would just party out in the countryside. He called the sheriff several times and tried to get rid of them, and the sheriff hadn't had any luck. So one night when those kids were out there trespassing on his land, he went out there and shot 3 of them. Then he called the sheriff and said, "You need to come get the bodies. I took care of those trespassers for you." Well, that gentleman went to jail. At the end of the story, my violator turned to me and he said, what he did wrong was he should have just buried their bodies in the woods and not told anybody. I'm alone in the woods with him, and that's when he pulled his gun. So what I want to tell you is always be safe. If you don't feel comfortable about something, don't meet with the violator. If you have a good working relationship with law enforcement, ask somebody if they can go with you. A lot of times the sheriff or the police department is perfectly happy to send somebody along with you just as an escort, as long as you have a good working relationship with them. I used to do favors for our local sheriff's office quite a bit. And so they owed me big time. All right, so always stay safe. At this point, we're going to talk about how to meet with your violator. Hopefully you're going to have that meeting in your office. It gives you the home turf advantage to have that meeting in your office. That's one reason to do it. Anybody ever get sent to the principal's office when they're in elementary school? Guess I was the only one. Well, there's a reason that you get sent to the principal's office. It's not like you get to meet with the principal in the playground at recess on the swing sets. No, you go to the principal's office. All right, so that's a power move. And when you have people meet with you in your own office, that's a subtle power move. It's not overbearing, but it gives you a little more weight. When you meet with people, I want you to always be professional now. That could mean a lot of things, but let's say that you're in the habit of wearing shorts and a t-shirt to work in the summertime. Perfectly fine with me, I don't care. But you'll get more traction with your violators if you wear business casual. If your community gives you a shirt and it has the embroidered name of the community on it, maybe it says Chief Building Inspector or something like that, well, wear that shirt that day. That will symbolize your authority a little bit. There's a reason why police officers wear badges. Be on time for the meeting. If you tell somebody you'd like to meet with them in your office at 2 o'clock on Thursday, be sure that you are there at 2 o'clock on Tuesday, okay? If you are 5 minutes late, you will spend the first 15 minutes of your meeting with that property owner talking about how you were late and you were disrespectful of them and wasted their time. And they're going to try to flip it and make it about you being late instead of talking about their violation. Don't fall into that trap, and the easiest way to avoid that trap is to be on time. Use your body language effectively. Somebody's coming into your office to meet with you. You shake hands at the door, come on in. If they refuse to sit down, you don't sit down at your desk either. You remain standing. If they sit down, then you sit down. They lean back in their chair, you lean back in the chair. If they lean forward, you lean forward. If they scratch their nose, for heaven's sake, you don't scratch your nose. We're not taking it that far. But the point is that you have your body level and posture at the same level as theirs. It shows them that you are comfortable with them. Nobody's standing over the top of somebody trying to be overbearing. We want them to be comfortable with us and us to be comfortable with them. Don't play the blame game. Nothing ever got solved by deciding who's at fault. Usually problems in the floodplain get solved through actions such as elevation certificates and moving properties around and installing flood vents. Blaming somebody never actually fixed a floodplain violation that I ever know of. And you'll get more traction and you'll solve more problems by not wasting time playing the blame game. So don't bring people in your office and say, you did this, you're a bad person. Try to get buy-in to the solution. I'll give you a little example of that. I was dealing with a farmer who had built a pole barn in the floodplain. This pole barn was easily floodproof. In fact, it looked like it was already a candidate for floodproofing with no extra work needed. But this farmer had never done a permit when he built it, and I needed to have a permit completed. He did come to my office, but he came in with the attitude that this is my land and you can't make me get a permit for my own land because this is my land. I can do whatever I want to on my land. My daddy farmed this land, and you get the idea. Well, I told him that we're in the National Flood Insurance Program, and the reason we're in it is so that his friends and neighbors who also have farms in the floodplain can get federally backed mortgages and can get flood insurance as a condition of their mortgages. And as I explained that, the light switch kind of went off in his head and he flipped it around completely. At this point, he decided that by him working with me to fill out a simple permit form, he was going to be the hero protecting his friends and neighbors from the mean old federal government taking their mortgages away. He filled out a permit form, left my office thinking he was the hero and that I was a dirtbag. And I don't care what he thought. It's fine with me if he thinks he's the hero, as long as I got my permit filled out and I didn't have a violation situation anymore. Explain what you need in clear detail. If you tell somebody they need to elevate their house and the gentleman leaves your office and goes out and puts some bottle jacks under the house and he jacks it all up and disconnects the utilities, puts 8-inch cinder blocks on top of the foundation, and he cements everything in place, lowers the house back down, reconnects the utilities, comes to see you, tells you he's elevated the house, and he's elevated the house full 8 inches on those 16-by-8 cinder blocks. That's wonderful, but what if you needed him to elevate it 10 inches? And you hadn't told him how high to elevate it, you just told him to elevate it. You weren't specific enough. In that situation, who's the problem? The property owner or the floodplain manager for not communicating effectively? So try to give them specifics. There's a skill called reflective listening. Now, you don't exactly echo what they say, but you select keywords and phrases that they give to you, and you bounce those keywords and phrases back to them to prove to them you're listening. And it works a little bit like this.
You don't understand my situation.
Your situation.
My husband ran off and joined a cult.
Joined a cult?
He joined the cult of the Yogi Maharaja Sun Eagle.
Maharaja Sun Eagle.
Gave all our money to the cult. I have no money to hire an engineer.
All right, you get the idea how it works. By bouncing a few phrases back to them here and there, you prove to them that you're listening to them. If you prove to them that you're listening to them, they're going to be more willing to listen to you. And when two people are listening to each other and they're communicating effectively, we solve more problems. So resolving violations is as much about solving problems as about anything else. Now, hopefully your violator has come into your office, met with you, and decided that they're going to do what it takes to bring the property into compliance, and it's all going to work out and have a happy ending. That's great, okay? But as they're leaving the office, I want you to shake their hands and say thank you. Always, always say thank you. There's a reason why police officers who will pull you over and give you a speeding ticket will often wish you to have a nice day and tell you thank you before you drive away. So always be polite and say thank you. Nobody can ever go to your county commissioners or your city council and say, the floodplain manager was impolite to me, if you've stood there and very politely said thank you. Now, as they're leaving, I also want you to tell them, hey, we talked about doing this, 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 and this. And I'm going to spell those bullet points out in a letter that I'm going to mail to you as soon as you leave the office. You should have it in the postal mail tomorrow. Most of the people I've worked with actually were glad to have that letter because that was a written record of what we had both agreed to. They knew that I wasn't going to change my mind later if I put it in writing like that for them. And it gave me a document. If anybody was on the seminar yesterday, you know that I said document, 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 and keep records of everything you do. Now we want to consider how did the violation happen so that we can move forward to solve the violation. There are people out there who think it's better to ask forgiveness than permission. So some people build stuff in the floodplain without a permit. And there are people that will not build without knowing you need a permit simply because they're unaware of permit requirements. So what the thing to do is, if you have people out there building because they don't know permits are required, do some outreach about your floodplain permit requirements. And for the people that think it's better to build and then ask for forgiveness later, well, I don't have much sympathy for them, to be quite honest with you. Oh, here we go, having some issues. Sometimes violators will build differently than the constructed plans. Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. I've got these little slides that aren't working too good. There we go. Okay, try that again. Anyway, I've got people that this works real good when I'm not doing it virtually. Violators build differently than the constructed plans. Let me give you an example. The situation is that there was a house that was being built on a small lot. It was big enough for the house to fit on it. It was a ranch style house, which you've ever seen an area looking down from the top is a rectangular shape. There was floodplain on the south end of the property. They laid the house out so that it met all the setback requirements, and the long axis of the rectangular house was going to run from east to west, and it would all fit in there without any of it being in the floodplain, so there was no floodplain permit required. The problem was that during construction, the wife decided she wanted the morning sun to come in the window while she was cooking breakfast. So she wanted to have that morning sunlight while she was having breakfast with the family. So the contractor rotated the house 90 degrees. Now the long axis is pointed north and south. This put the south end of the building in the floodplain. And by putting the south end of the building in the floodplain without a floodplain permit, we ran into all kinds of problems. So the floodplain manager did something that has never ever happened before. The floodplain manager found out that the end of the building that was in the floodplain was also in an easement for power line wires. She contacted the power line company and asked them, are they going to enforce their easement? And the power company said, yes, we are. And they did enforce their easement, and that house got moved. And the floodplain manager never even had to send a violation letter to the property owner. If somebody gives you incorrect site information, do you have a line on your permit forms that says something to the effect of, this permit will be revoked if incorrect information is provided? If you want to see a permit form that says that, we have sample permits that say that. Elevations not checked during construction. Another violation story to tell. Property up in northeastern Kansas it was, and they were building a building on top of a pad of dirt. Surveyor came out, drove a stake in the ground, wrote down on the stake how high to elevate, and had put a black line on the stake that said, this is the best flood elevation. This is how high you need to make this pad of dirt to put this building on top of. Surveyor left. Property owner took a big hammer and drove the stake down into the ground about a foot. So now that line is a foot lower than it used to be because the whole stake is pushed into the ground. Dirt contractor arrives, and the property owner tells the dirt contractor, yeah, you need to make this pad of dirt for this building the same level as that what's shown on that stake. Now, this was a community that didn't do in-process construction inspections. They did a pre and a final. So the whole thing got built before they discovered what the property owner had done. And yes, this was discovered. Maybe you've got deficiencies in the local permit process. That's going to be stuff like maybe the floodplain manager is you. And maybe you're in one of my small towns where you are the one and only person who's ever been to a floodplain training class. Well, if you're on vacation and somebody else is handing out permit forms while you're gone, make sure that person understands floodplain management requirements and at least how to read a flood map. All right. So always do training. Do you have the right to go on the property and inspect the foundation pour? Again, we have a sample permit form that has a line on it that says that the floodplain manager has the right to go on the property and inspect the construction during the construction phase. I know some communities have that, some communities don't. If you want to see that sample permit form, get with Cheyenne and we can send you a copy of it. But by signing the permit form, they're agreeing to let you come onto their property, and they can't say, well, you're trespassing. You can show them that they wrote down on the permit form they were agreeing to do that with you. All right. If the problem was due to ordinance deficiencies, then change your ordinance. Some of the ordinances in some of my communities are not very clear on heating and mechanical equipment. The language is not as good as it is on the freeboard for the lowest floor. So we have a general section in most of our ordinances and a specific section. The specific section talks specifically about freeboards for buildings, but the HVAC and mechanical is covered in the general section, and the language isn't as clear and specific. Move that language into the specific section, rewrite the language if you have language that isn't very clear. One of the problems we've had is this phrase, top of the bottom floor. Meeting with a property owner to issue a permit. It's happened 3 times in the state of Kansas. Told them that the top of the bottom floor had to be 1 foot above the base flood elevation. And 3 times we've had brand new houses with basements built in the floodplain, because when the house was finished, the property owner went down in the basement, said, I'm on the bottom floor, and he pointed his finger up at the ceiling and said, that's the top of it up there. The property owner didn't understand what top of the bottom floor meant. So again, clear communication, specifics, worry about the language. And if your local ordinance doesn't have language in it about penalties and enforcement, you might want to beef it up. A lot of our ordinances have only a few lines that talk about penalties and enforcement. If you don't want to amend your ordinances, you can easily adopt this into written administrative procedures to go with your ordinance about how you'll enforce violations. Again, I really like it written administrative procedures. There's just not room to have everything in the ordinance about who issues permits when you're on vacation and where are permit files kept and how fast permits need to be approved. You want to approve your permits in a timely manner. If the word gets out in your community that it takes 3 months to get a permit approved, people are going to build without asking for a permit. If they know that you'll get a permit back to them within a few days, they're more likely to come to your office and apply for a permit. That's the honest truth of it. Work on communication between departments. It has actually happened that here in the great state of Kansas, I had building inspectors that were in a different department than the floodplain manager, who was usually associated with zoning or some other department. The building inspector, on the exact same day that the floodplain manager sent him a violation notice, sent him an occupancy certificate saying everything was okay with the building. You think that caused any consternation? So if you have other departments that are involved in permit procedures, make sure those other departments know to send people to you when buildings are in the floodplain and they know how to read a flood map. That's the great thing about GIS. A lot of communities that don't even talk to each other still look at the same GIS database system. I really like our DWR website. I used to have a guy work for me, his name's Martin, good guy. He liked the National Flood Hazard Layer, but I actually think our DWR current effective floodplain map viewer is better and easier and faster for me to get and use than the National Flood Hazard Layer. So make sure that people who are involved in permitting know how to use resources and have training. Then you won't have violations that happen because of glitches in the community's process. All right. So the point of this is, if the problems with violations are happening because of something in our local level, in our local administration, then we need to fix those. Plug the loops in our regulations. Make our permits more specific. If you make a mistake, admit it. When I send a violation letter to somebody that says that their building at such and such, or whatever it is, doesn't have a permit, I don't say you built without a permit. I usually put language in there that says something like, a search of our records could not locate a permit for the new building at 123 Elm Street. That leaves me some wiggle room in case there was a mistake made where somebody else actually did approve a permit and then didn't file it correctly. I know of actual true cases where that has happened. So we've plugged up all our own problems. What else can we do? Well, you could ignore a violation, hopefully it'll go away. I hate to let you know this, but I'm 60 years old, and it was usually people about my age who are the ones that have tried this, because at least 2 of them that I know of were trying to push the violation far enough down the road that they could retire without having to deal with it. So it's actually the people of my own generation that have been guilty of this the most often, of not dealing with violations right away. You always want to deal with your violations as soon as you're aware of them. Timeliness is extremely important, not only for you, but for the community, for the property owner, for their insurance. Look at our Kansas base flood elevation portal. Every floodplain manager in the state of Kansas should be signed up for our BFE portal. One of the things you can do on this BFE portal is get a base flood elevation and unnumbered A zone, but the other thing you can do is look at LIDAR quickly and easily. You can click on a point on a map in the portal, and the LIDAR ground elevation will appear in the upper left corner of the screen. When you know the LiDAR ground elevation, that sometimes suggests a solution to solve a violation problem. Maybe this is a candidate for LOMA. If we get a LOMA, it's not in the floodplain anymore, and it's not a floodplain violation. Maybe there's just a grading that would help out to resolve the floodplain violation. So maybe we could do some simple grading of the terrain and turn a crawl space that's below grade into a crawl space that's above grade and still have a perfectly good building without having to get in there and do a major retrofit. So look at the LiDAR for a clue on how to deal with the violation. People will appreciate it if you come up with a solution that costs them less money and time. I can't tell you how many times I've seen it where they elevated a house correctly and then put the heat pump or the HVAC unit on the ground beside it. You can see the high water line on this unit. Now, when you send somebody a violation notice, say, hey, you built your house right, but you didn't build your utilities right, you need to elevate them. One of the things you can mention to them is that they will see a cost savings on their flood insurance by elevating the utilities. I don't tell them they're going to save a whole ton of money. It's really, on a $1,000 policy, you'll save about $50 by elevating your utilities correctly. It's not a lot of money, but every little bit helps. So use every tool in the toolbox to gain compliance is what I'm telling you to do. So helping people save money, you know, when they're going to complain to you that this is going to cost them money, you can tell them, yes, but you'll also save money on your flood insurance. It won't pay for itself the first year, but it will eventually help out. Sometimes buildings are substantially improved. This is a mobile home that was made back in the days when they still made single wide mobile homes commonly before they started calling them manufactured homes. And I don't know what a 1962 single wide mobile home is worth on today's market. I'm going to guess about $500. So the material that was used to make this room addition is easily more than $250 worth. So this would be a substantial improvement on a pre-firm building. Now this was being built by a college professor, and he was from a university, and he sent the floodplain manager a letter full of $10 words, and the $10 words were all about why he didn't have to comply with the floodplain regulations, and he was basically trying to use some college professor BS, but our floodplain manager didn't fall for it. Now, we didn't do it in this case, but one thing to keep in mind is that manufactured homes and mobile homes are fairly easy to elevate if you have to come back in later and elevate them. Just be specific about how high they need to be elevated. Violations can be expensive. Show people this chart. It comes right out of our quick guidebook, which was updated in 2019. I hope you've got a copy of it. Everybody who's at the KFM conference last year got a copy of it. If you don't have a copy of our new book yet, it can be downloaded from our website. If you'd like to see a paper copy, get with Cheyenne. We might be able to put one in the mail for you. Or she might be in your area to pay a visit someday and she'll drop one off. I had two people that didn't build in the floodplain at all because of this book and this page right here. I showed them this. They were arguing with me about building a house with a basement. Well, I told them that if they elevated, they'd save money on their flood insurance. When I showed them this, they not only decided to not build the house with the basement, they decided to not build the house in the floodplain period. So that was kind of nice for me. And so I use this with violations also to show people, like, look, when you get your insurance bill, it's going to cost you. So you might as well fix it now and you'll save money in the long run. Always use tools to gain compliance. Try to talk people into it. Get them on your side. Show them you're actually trying to help them by dealing with their violation. There is a statute of limitations on floodplain violations. Most floodplain violations are misdemeanor land use crimes in the state of Kansas. And misdemeanor crimes in our state have a state statute that limits them to 5 years. Now, I had one attorney whose opinion was that no matter how long it's been there, every day that it's still there constitutes a new violation and the statute of limitations starts over for it. I've had judges that say different. You can get 10 lawyers in a room and ask them the same question, you get 10 different answers. Same way if you get 10 people from FEMA in the room and ask them the same question. All right, I went down the wrong path there. So keep your statute of limitations in mind. This is one reason why you need to deal with floodplain issues quickly and not postpone them. This is the actual copy of the state statute about misdemeanor crimes. Think of it this way. If you don't deal with a violation and you're aware of it and I know you're aware of it, and I tell FEMA you're aware of it, and you decide to postpone it for 5 years, you don't get a get out of jail free card because the statute of limitations has expired. FEMA's going to tell you, you still got to take care of it. But how are you going to do that if you can't take them to court? Well, in one community that I know of, FEMA told that community that the houses would have to be elevated and the community would have to pay for it, not the citizens, because it was the community's fault. Would you like to have to go to your city council and say that we have to pay to elevate somebody's house because I didn't bother to send them a violation letter? No. If you do this long enough, somebody's going to come up to you and they're going to say, well, it's already built. You're just going to have to give me a variance. I'd like everybody who ever says just going to have to automatically be fined $500. I hate that phrase because it's usually followed by nonsense. The thing to keep in mind about variances is they are not a tool to solve violations. There are rare instances when you can do violations, but not to solve violations. I am not aware of a single violation where a variance was the legal and approved option to deal with it. This brings us to the crossroads of regulations in insurance. Your regulations, each and every one of you has an ordinance, resolution, codes that say that you're allowed to issue variances. And if you follow the rules in your ordinance, you can issue a variance. But by issuing that variance, the property owner could end up with more expensive insurance. That's the crossroads where regulations and insurance don't line up. These are the conditions for a variance. Everybody has these conditions almost word for word spelled out in their floodplain management ordinances. I've put most of these conditions on a variance form. So I've created a variance request form that has these conditions on it with a blank line next to it for the property owner to specify whether they meet this condition or not. If you'd like to see that variance request form, get with Cheyenne, she'll email it to you. All right. There is something that it doesn't state on this variance request form, and I'm just going to bring it up. Sometimes when you issue somebody a variance to build something at risk of flooding and their house does flood, our local fire departments have to go out and do water rescues and put their lives at risk. I want you to keep that in mind when you're talking to your variance appeal board about how somebody wants to build a variance. We had one in a city in north central Kansas where a real estate developer had bought a small parcel of land, just a couple of acres in the floodplain. It was cheap because it was in the floodplain. He also bought a single-wide manufactured home. He bought it cheap. He put the single-wide manufactured home on that parcel of land, and then he sold it at a markup to an elderly woman to live in her retirement years. He told us that he didn't get a floodplain permit. The floodplain manager, city clerk, she sent him a violation notice, and that was really good. Well, problem was, he called her to complain. She told him if he didn't like it, he could call Steve. So the guy calls me and tells me I need to issue a variance for this mobile home because this old lady has a bad hip and she can't climb all those stairs if it's elevated. Well, he's confused in a few things. First of all, I don't issue variances in your community for you. I just explain the rules and regulations to these pinheads that are calling you with nonsense like that. Second thing is, variances are not for old ladies with bad hips. Variances are for buildings. What reason does this building need to be there below the floodplain? Insufficient reasons for a variance. I've heard all of these reasons before, and I'm going to talk to you about unnecessary hardship. Unnecessary hardship is a common phrase that you will hear when dealing with variances in the realm of zoning. It also applies in floodplain. The hardship cannot be caused by the violator's own action. If somebody builds something without a permit, they've created their own problem. So that hardship that they've created for themselves by building a permit does not mean they get a get out of jail free card with a variance. Do variance boards ever approve things that they shouldn't? Yeah, they sometimes do, and I have no control over that, but it's up to us to go to the variance meetings and try to educate people. Disclosure requirements for a variance. So we all know that if somebody gets a variance, we need to send them a letter that says that you will have more expensive insurance possibly because of this variance. And you would send that letter by certified mail and you'd keep a copy in your file. We've all heard this before. We also have on our variance request form very similar language to that. So I'd urge you to take a look at it if you're ever going to deal with a variance in the floodplain. Now, keep that notice on file in your office. And along with that notice, you need to send them a snorkel, a life jacket, and flippers. Now I'm being real silly, but if somebody's house is below the base flood elevation and their house is going to flood and they need to swim out of the flood, they might appreciate having some of this. Here we have a violator who just got his variance approved. It came in a box in the mail along with his variance approval letter and his notice that his insurance could be more expensive. Now, a little quick disclaimer about variances. There are people from FEMA that tell you never issue a variance. We've had variances in the state of Kansas, but not very many of them. One of them was for a boathouse. And the nature of boathouses means that boats need water, so it had to be right next to the river in a floodway. And we did a variance on the construction because the local community had a higher standard that prohibited buildings in the floodplain in the floodway, excuse me, completely. So they issued a local variance for that. But as a general rule, avoid variances. Boathouse is what you call functionally dependent upon having water for its use. There's an entire book about variances. You can order this book. We ordered this, I myself was on a board of zoning appeals in my local community. And because I also was a floodplain manager, I ordered 7 copies of this book, and I gave 1 copy to every member of the Board of Zoning Appeals that was on the board with me. That way they would be educated and ready when a floodplain management variance request came before them. So if you want to do that for your own community, you can order these books for free from FEMA. Get with me later and I'll tell you how to do it. Don't just issue variances for everything. If you have violations and you try to solve them with variances, then you're going to have other people that are going to come to you and say, well, he got a variance for his building below the floodplain after he built it, so just let me go ahead and build 3 new buildings in the floodplain in my real estate development below the base flood elevation. If he says no, he says, well, then I'll just build them anyway and come get a variance from you. So you don't even want to fall down that slippery slope. If FEMA finds out you're issuing variances, instead of following up what it says you'll do in your ordinance, they'll decide that you're not actually living up to your agreement with them under the NFIP. Now, some of you know this already, but I have a network of spies. I have spies in every single city in Kansas practically. And those spies are called local insurance agents, because if there's a variance issued for a building, that building could have more expensive insurance. Those local insurance agents submit those insurance policies to a FEMA building and somewhere on the East Coast, and there's little men locked in a basement who review all those policies, and those insurance wonks will notify FEMA headquarters in Washington that this community's got this building that's got an expensive policy because it's a new building below the flash flood elevation. FEMA in Washington notifies the FEMA office in Kansas City, Missouri, and FEMA office in Kansas City calls me and says, Steve, what the heck is going on? Then I'm going to call you. So that's just one thing to keep in mind with variances. Don't think that we won't know, we'll know. If an applicant applies for variance and the variance is denied, your applicant has the right to take it to court. They have the right to go to district court. So if they do that, maybe they win, maybe they lose. But now that we're talking about court, let's talk about courtroom procedures. There could be violations where somebody will ask for variance, was denied, refuses to work with you, or it just throws your letters away without ever talking to you. Okay, so maybe, just maybe, you're going to have to take them to court. And if you have to take them to court, you want to be prepared. So here's a few steps in getting ready to take a case to court. Do you have a good working relationship with your legal staff? So let's just talk about like a city as an example. So do you work with your city attorney regularly? Do you know your city attorney? I hope you do. Have you kept good records all along? We talked about record keeping a lot yesterday and all the different types of violation notices. When you get ready to go to court, go sit down with your city attorney and have a pretrial conference with the attorney. Okay? Your attorney is not a floodplain management expert. Your attorney is a legal expert. So you have to educate your attorney about floodplain management, what base flood elevations mean. You're also going to have to let your attorney educate you on courtroom procedures and how to act. If you've been taking pictures of the violation, lay all the pictures out with your attorney. Let the attorney pick out the pictures that the attorney thinks would be the best ones to use in court. Now, this one gives you the advantage that you know which pictures your attorney is going to show in court of the violation. So you won't get hit out of left field if your attorney shows a picture in court that you don't remember. Review your notes by refreshing your memory. You're allowed to do that. I was once a jury foreman in a sexual assault case, and before the case began, a police officer's report was written into the record. So they start the trial off by reading to us from the police report to explain what this trial is going to be all about. Later on during the trial, the actual police officer was brought in to testify. And his testimony on the day 2 of the trial did not match very well what was said on day 1 of the trial in the police report. It mostly matched, but there were inconsistencies here and there, and the defense attorney jumped all over those inconsistencies. I was told later on, after the court case was over, that this police officer is normally a very good witness, but the prosecutor said that the police officer worked a double shift the night before and had run into court the next morning as soon as he got off his shift and had not had time to review his notes, and all of this stuff from this trial had happened 4 months earlier, and he had just forgotten a few things. Dress appropriately. I've actually seen people show up for court in pajamas. Turn your phone off while you're on the witness stand. I had to remember to turn off my phone today for this deal. If you do an internet search for how to testify in court or other phrases like that, you will find hundreds of websites. And here are a few things that I thought were the best ideas based on what I had seen in the courtrooms when I had been selected for jury duty and what I read on the internet. So think for a moment before you speak. That's the second bullet point. And I want to tell you on that one, sometimes lawyers will try to trick you. They want to get you into a rhythm. So a lawyer might say something like, is your name Steve? Yes, it is. Are you a floodplain manager? Yes, it is. You work for state Kansas? Yes, it is. Are you married? Yes, I am. Did you beat your wife? So they try to get you in that rhythm of just saying yes over and over and over again. And then you slip up and you say yes because you're in that rhythm. So pause for a second before you speak, even if you're sure what the answer is. And be absolutely honest. Even if you think the answer is going to go against you, it's better to tell the truth and be absolutely honest than to try to make up something or hedge around. Remember to speak clearly and try not to use acronyms. We all know what BFE means. It stands for base flood elevation, but quite honestly, a lot of courtroom judges and attorneys don't even know what a base flood elevation is. Don't argue or make jokes, just stick to the facts. Ask to have a question repeated if you need time to think. And it's legal for you to stand there in the witness box and say, that was 4 months ago. Let me look at my notes to refresh my memory on that. You are allowed to do that. While you're testifying, look at the judge, or if there's a jury, look at the jury box. Look at them. Don't look at the attorney that's asking you these smart-aleck questions. The attorneys will try to stand there at an angle so that your face is turned away from the judge, and so the judge can't see your face to know if he thinks you're telling the truth or not. If the attorney's going to trick you into lying, then he'll walk over to the other side. So you have to turn and look at him and show your face to the judge. They play these little games in the courtroom. If you do refer to your notes, then somebody may want to see your notes, and they may look at your handwriting and they may say, well, this number 2 looks to me like a number 5, and so I think you were actually at 512 Elm Street instead of 212 Elm Street, and this whole court case is for the wrong house because you were at the wrong address. So they may actually try to muddy the waters by talking about how your handwriting looks. So if you do carry a little notebook around in your pocket, and I'm 60 years old and I did a lot of stuff, I never touched a computer till I was 45. I'm just used to carrying notebook paper around and writing notes to myself all the time. Make sure those notes are legible if you're going to be used as something in a court case, all right? Now, maybe you go to court and you lose. There was a community a while back that lost a court case, and what happened was the house was in a fire. The house burnt down. When they rebuilt the house, they were notified substantial improvement, but the property owners refused to elevate the house. They rebuilt on the existing foundation. So now I got a house that's 4 foot below BFE. They got a violation notice, but there was a staff change in the community and the new staff didn't follow up on the violation. Meanwhile, the house was sold on a private contract sale. Private contract sale meant no bank loan. No bank loan meant no flood insurance. It was sold again on a private contract sale. Now I've got a third owner and no flood insurance on this house that's 4 feet below the BFE. Third owner got an equity credit line on the house. Now a bank was involved. Bank required flood insurance, and the house is 4 foot below the base flood elevation, so the flood insurance was pretty expensive. At this point in time, the third property owner sued everybody, including the community. It all went to court. In the court case, one of the lawyers told the judge that the house that burned down had legal zoning before it burnt down. The lot was zoned for residential, and they rebuilt a residential structure, so the case should be thrown out because the zoning was never violated. Well, this was not a zoning case. It was a floodplain management case. But the judge said, yeah, you're right, and threw the case out of court. And we never even got a chance to educate the judge on the difference between zoning and floodplain management. That's something that happens once in a while because you have uneducated judges and uneducated lawyers who don't know the difference between zoning and floodplain management. And we have those words flood zone on the map, and that confuses the issue. So you've gone to court and maybe you've lost the case. What else can you do? Well, you can use something called notice on deed, or you could have it put on the 1316 list. I prefer the notice on deed. I could tell you for about 30 minutes why I prefer that, but I've got to keep it short because we don't have much time. So the notice on deed is an affidavit of nonconformance that you type up and attach to the deed. Imagine a situation where you have a violation and the property owner refuses to comply. You have a notice attached to the deed. Property's up for sale. New buyer hires a title abstract company to do a title search. The abstract company finds the notice on the deed and tells the new buyer about it. New buyer goes back to the seller and says, hey, look, there's this violation on the property. We're either not going to buy it till you clear it up, we're going to drop our buying price by $20,000, or we're just going to walk away completely. So now the seller has an incentive to fix the problem that they never had before. Years may have gone by, but they'll come knocking on your door saying, hey, what do I got to do to fix this so I can sell this property? That's how notice on deed works to gain compliance. This is a non-conforming zoning affidavit that was attached to a deed. Many of the floodplain management codes in Kansas are a floodplain district under zoning in their local communities. So if it's legal to do it in zoning, you can do it for floodplain management as well. Many of the floodplain management statutes here in the state of Kansas are in the same section of statutes from the state of Kansas as the zoning is. Those statutes that give you the right to inspect floodplains and to enforce floodplain management regulations. So by that, I would say that floodplain management nonconformance affidavits are just as legal as zoning nonconformance affidavits. Here's a few quick tips on how to do one of these. Make sure the legal descriptions are an exact match. Don't be off by one tiny detail. Specify the regulations and the maps that you used, because if this exists out there for a period of years, you may get new maps, you may get updated regulations, so you want to let them know what maps you were looking at the time that this was on the deed. If they ever clear up the situation, you cannot remove the notice from the deed. You pay a $20 filing fee to file that notice on the deed with your register of deeds. You have to come back later and file a new notice that says, now at this time, the previous nonconformance has been cleared up. So you attach two of them now, one that says it's bad and one that says we followed up, we're good now. You can't just take it off. It always stays there. Now, denial of flood insurance with a 1316 list. Property on the 1316 list, you have to go to FEMA. FEMA has to approve it. They have to put it on the 1316 list. That's a list of properties that aren't allowed to buy flood insurance from the National Flood Insurance Program. So there's a couple of problems with the 1316 list, but I'll give you our little example earlier. You have a violator, properties for sale. The new buyer hires an abstract company to title search. That doesn't show them that the property is on the 1316 list. You only find out it's on the 1316 list when you try to buy insurance on it. So they say it has clear title. The violator sells the property, they take their money and they move to Florida. Now you have a new buyer. New buyer goes to the bank, signs the closing paperwork on the bank. Bank typically gives new buyers a period of time to buy flood insurance. They get their furniture moved into the house and they go down and see their insurance agent a day or two later to buy the flood insurance. At that time, their agent tells them that this property can't buy flood insurance because it's on this special list. So now the people who have just bought the house are stuck dealing with the violation. Sometimes the 1316 list punishes the innocent. Now these people have the right to try to file a lawsuit against the previous owner. And that's going to take time and that's going to cost them money, but it should have been the previous owner who's dealing with all the headaches. The other thing is that here in the great state of Kansas, we are seeing more and more private flood insurance companies come in. And those private flood insurance companies will sell flood insurance to a property that's on the 1316 list, as long as it's never filed a flood insurance claim before. So if you have a new house that hasn't flooded yet, it would probably qualify to buy private flood insurance, because the 1316 list isn't being shared around between FEMA and those private insurance companies. So the 1316 list tends to punish the innocent instead of punishing the people that caused the problem. Also, I don't know if you've ever heard of FEMA, but FEMA is a giant bureaucratic organization. No offense to anybody from FEMA who's listening. If you want to have an efficient, well-run program, the best way to do it is to create a giant bureaucratic organization to run it. I've had quite a few problems trying to get properties off the 1316 list here in the state of Kansas, even after they'd been corrected. Again, that's a topic for another day. I got to push on. We will get these slides out to everybody. Cheyenne's going to convert this PowerPoint into a PDF and email it to you, so you don't have to write all this stuff down. We're going to get that out to you. Since we're talking about 1316 list and insurance, a quick word about insurance. Always talk to people about flood insurance when you're doing floodplain permits. Here's some good websites that we have. You just do a Google search for Kansas floodplain. That'll take you right to our DWR website most of the time. You can find our floodplain viewer there and some other good information. Our written administrative procedures, our quick guide are all out there. FEMA has a lot of good book publications. I talked about that book on variances. You can order them from the FEMA library. Last word, can a local community official be held responsible for not enforcing their violations? This goes back to that old saying, you can't sue City Hall. Well, the fact of the matter is you can sue City Hall. If you have time, I suggest you read the Kansas Torts Act. The Kansas Tort Claims Act says that a local community can be held responsible for omission or actions of one of their employees. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm ever going to be in trouble, I'd rather be in trouble for doing my job to the best of my ability than to be in trouble for not doing my job at all, by omitting to do my job. Does that make sense? I hope it does. All right, so I'm going to leave this slide up there for about a minute. You can see my contact information. So if you have a violation you're dealing with right now and you want to talk it over with me, that's fine. You can give me a call. Cheyenne will be sending up some follow-up information. So if you want the PowerPoint, if you want the written administrative procedures, the variance request form, some of the other things we've talked about today, just send Cheyenne an email at cheyenne.suneagle@ks.gov. Maybe you might want to send her an email, and ask her how running that cult is going for her. I don't know. So we're going to leave this slide up for about another minute. Meanwhile, Cheyenne, you can take people off of mute and see if we have any questions.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Yeah, so we don't really have many questions in the chat, just a couple of comments. Like, I guess Steve Higgins and their community is using the floodplain quick guide illustrations in their regulations.
Yep. He had talked to me about that. I said, go for it. I think a picture's worth 1,000 words. And so if you have a picture of an ag building next to your floodplain regulations in your section on agriculture structures, it's a great way to illustrate the point, and there'll be less confusion by anybody who reads that.
Hey guys, this is Steve Higgins. Yes, we're doing that, and we're going to get that to you this week for you to take a look at that. We've got it in there.
Okay, send it to Cheyenne first. She is the official floodplain ordinance reviewer for the state of Kansas.
All right, Cheyenne, you're the one.
She's also our training officer for floodplain management now, and our NFIP specialist. She's wearing a lot of hats.
Ooh.
Yeah, well, don't worry, Cheyenne. I'm not going to throw you into the deep end right now.
I knew a guy named Steve Samuelson that used to wear those hats.
Yeah, I was glad to turn them over to somebody else. Okay, let's keep it focused on the violation. So anybody got any questions about the violation stuff?
Yes, please unmute yourself if you have any other questions.
Well, Cheyenne, why don't you tell them about how to get their CFM certificates?
Great. Please email me that you would like your certificate and I will get that sent out to you. And please let me know if you want the slides or any of the other documents that we talked about, the sample documents that we have. Just let me know what you like.
All right. All right. There's a comment in the chat from Mike Kendall. So Mike, you're a state coordinator. Heard a presentation I did at an ASFPM conference. Is that who who told you about this presentation?
Yeah, Kathy Holder, we have monthly, or actually weekly, since this COVID things broke out. We have weekly webinars, and she suggested this, and I'm glad I came.
All right. Well, I'm glad. Tell Kathy that it was worthwhile. And by the way, so if you're from Utah or Montana or any other state, if you want to steal my slides, you just get with me. We'll give them to you. We're all in this together.
Okay, thanks.
So Teresa was saying, could we possibly put those, you know,
Some of them already are on the website,
Mhm.
but we'll see what we can do, Teresa.
Okay, thank you.
Well, if that's all the questions, I'm going to say thank you everybody for attending. I know that I talked real fast like an auctioneer there, but I had a lot of information to get through. So thank you for coming. All right. Have a
Thank
great
you,
day,
everyone.
everybody. Yeah.
Please send me any questions, your requests for credit, and anything else you might need. Yeah, send me an email. But we appreciate you joining us today. So thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Have a good day, everyone.